Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the third part in our virtual webinar series, The Art and Science of Practical Management, Core Skills for Leadership and Management, with Professor Joe Martin, the President of the Royal College of Pathologists. My name is Dr. Matthew Clark, and I'm a neuropathology trainee and the Chair of the Trainee Advisory Committee for the Royal College of Pathologists, and it's my pleasure to be chairing these sessions in this series. First of all, welcome to all those people that have been at the previous two sessions, and also a big welcome to anyone who's just joined us for the first time tonight. If you haven't seen the first two parts, you can find the first part up on the website of the Royal College of Pathologists. So please go and take a look at the first session that Joe gave us, and the second one should be up towards the end of the week as well. And the other subsequent seminars will also appear on there every week also. So you can catch up with those ones you didn't see, and also see those again that you're particularly interested in as well. Just to give you some information about the format tonight, there'll be a 15 to 20 minute presentation from Joe, and then we'll have a Q&A session afterwards, and we would welcome any questions from all the audience. Joe would love to have some questions to answer during this session, and if you would like to do that, you will see the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Please type your questions in there. You can either type them in at the end of the presentation or during the presentation, and then we'll work our way through them towards the end as well. You will notice that all your microphones and videos have been turned off. That's just to help us with the connectivity for the evening and to help it to run efficiently. And now, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Joe, who tonight will be talking to us about core tools in surfing the system. Can you just send me over to you, Joe?
Thank you so much, Matt. So I'm going to put some slides up, and my job tonight is to see if I can interest you, even remotely, in some of the fantastic forms and where to find them. And that sounds very weird, but you will get asked for all different sorts of documents. If you manage anything, if you lead something, you will get asked for this sort of form. And I'm going to share some of these with you. I'm going to concentrate on just a few and where to get examples and where to get help when you're trying it. So the three categories of things that I think you get asked for most outside business cases, which we've already discussed, are job descriptions and specifications, performance and quality reports, and then risk assessments and risk registers. And my appalling duty this evening is to try and interest you in why they might be important and why it's actually useful to know how to do them and to be able to do them. So first of all, a job description. This is random sort of snapshots from a job description for a consultant clinical chemist. And most job descriptions are formatted in a very similar way. They've got what the post is, they've got some general information, where is it, which city is it in, who's employing you, all about the department, who works in the department, what different staff work there, is it UCAS accredited, what sort of equipment is there. There'll be duties as well. So are you expected to, run an analyzer? Are you expected to run clinics? Out of hours commitments, what the arrangements are for leave and facilities. Will you get your own office? Ooh, well, heavens, that's a possibility, not a probability. And then the main conditions of service, which would generally be in line for most of us, but not all of us, with the health service ones. There will also be a person specification attached to that, or attached to the advert, which has what is required, what is essential, and what is desirable. If you look at examples of these, you'll see examples of where essential and desirable qualifications or experience are listed. When you're applying for a job, it's actually really useful to have a look at the person spec and to make sure that your CV or the sections that you are filling in reflect those. All these areas will be tested at interview or through your application form. or should be tested. If you are writing one of these, please don't overspec. I've seen and challenged successfully a person specification for an associate chief nurse that specified that the candidate had to be physically able to walk around the hospital. No, they don't. They could be a wheelchair user. So don't overspec, and please do consider equality and certainly disability in that spec when you are writing it. Don't overspec it for the job. So that's a sort of potted summary of job descriptions and job specifications. Where can you get examples? So of course you can find really useful information on the RCPath website. And there are model job descriptions for doctors, clinical scientists, and information on this on the IBMS website. There are also, if you Google, there's often adverts for various jobs, and you can have a look at the job descriptions in there. And you'll start to see which are good ones and which are not so good. There are model ones on our RCPath website too. And we also offer for consultant posts, Reshma at the college will actually check them through, and they often will come up with some really helpful suggestions or corrections to things, which will make life a lot easier in the long term. Common things about job descriptions: it says what you're supposed to do, but time moves on. So most of us who've been at consultant level have been at that for a long time, and my JD is probably very little to do with what I do now. And you can alter what you do during the day and night, indeed, by mutual agreement. And you can alter your job description if you follow an appropriate process. It's very bad to change the grade of a job by mutual agreement, because it's not fair. So you have to bear in mind equality if anyone's talking to you about actually, I think the job I'm doing needs to be reflected. It's different, and it needs to be reflected in my job description. A useful catch-all that some people put in is "as the service requires," and that was in response to some perceived problems with people saying it's not in my JD, I'm not doing it. So often travel between sites. If a job description says that you have to work on the Whips Cross site and yet you're required to go over to Barts, it is a problem. But most of the job descriptions for most trusts will now include the potential to have to move to another site as the service requires. And the other thing is, do you really need all those elements in the job description? So make sure that you've got things covered, but you've got the job description all sorted. Performance and quality reporting. So this is a basic set of job performance and quality reporting. It's pretty standard in a department to have to say, be accountable for how you're doing against particular standards. So this performance and quality reporting has got some numbers. It's got the green numbers here, which have got the MRSA numbers of bacteremia, and then it tracks those over time. Performance and quality reporting is generally to standards or aspirational local targets. And you'll find any number of examples of performance and quality reporting formats around. So I've got one from Scotland, one from Wales, and there's a UK one about UK waiting times. There are some standards on the RCPath website that help you in assessing some of your performance, particularly the cancer data sets and tissue pathways. And we've got audit pro formas and templates to help you assess that. these are all examples. I'm going to pull up one particular example which is relevant to pathology. Now, this is an NHSE one, but the principles are also, similar principles are used in the US, in Australia, and in certain parts of Europe also. And these are the pathology quality assurance dashboard indicators. So when you look at the performance, how is a department doing? It's not just, are we getting it right? It's also, how are we doing? Are we doing it in a timely fashion? Have we got accreditation? Are we sticking to our national standards? Are we training, educating people? Are we talking to the people who use our services, and are we listening to them? Not, we can talk to them, but we also need to listen to them and put in their suggestions. And then are we buying things in the right way? Are we buying things in an efficient way? Are we putting in new things that should be? If there's a new test that we should have implemented, have we done it? And then there's some stuff around aspirational metrics. How can we move to getting better? The health check stuff around serious incidents and staff turnover and sickness is quite important, because staff turnover is an indicator that if it's very high, and also sickness rates, it can be a metric that reflects poor morale, or a dysfunctional department, and it can reflect stress also. It can indicate that we've got a pandemic, so I'm not saying that all sickness is related to that, but if you've got high sickness rates, then it puts stress on the remaining staff, and sickness rates escalate. So these are all elements that you might have a look at the health check of the department. The other area is operational performance, and this really relates to patient-facing metrics. Are patients getting their results on time? Are the local patient pathways being adhered to? Are antibiotics being given in line with sepsis requirements? And that's all the operational quality and performance measures. You can find examples of performance and quality reporting all over the place, but ones that are particularly fun to look at are your own organisation's performance and quality reports on the trust board papers. Just as an example, just see how many times they mention pathology, brackets, not many, but just encourage them to do so. The trust board papers for NHS trusts across England, Scotland and Wales are required to be publicly available. And this is just a snapshot just from a random one that I picked, which was Shrewsbury and Telford's. And you'll see that they've got a series of reports that you can all click on and see. So those are other examples of performance and quality reports that you might care to look at. So risk assessments, and we come on to the glorious, everybody loves a risk assessment, don't tell me that you don't love them. So actually they're part of a proper governance structure for risk. If you use them thoughtfully rather than just as a tick box or getting it out the way, they can be a really helpful approach to risk management and mitigation. I admit filling in forms and it's not much fun, but it's enormously better than the alternative when something goes pear-shaped and you haven't thought about something that you should have done. Risk assessments, risk registers are not fire and forget, they're live. They help you think through what the main problems are likely to be, and documenting them helps show that you've thought about them, but it also helps you think about them. And when you share these documents with others, you get a lot of insight into what's happened, and you can use other people's experience to help you think about how you can manage risk. And we work in a really, we work in a health service that is full of risk. We don't work with missiles, but we work with dangerous drugs, we work with dangerous chemicals, we work with biological agents. And this is an example of the COVID one that I filled in. This is a COVID risk assessment that I had to fill in order to do our care home trial, which had rapid testing. And that really forced me to think about who I was exposing potentially to viruses, how we were going to stop them being infected, what controls had we got in place. And bear in mind, you know, SARS-CoV-2 is something that there's no treatment for. So you know, the risk mitigation, the risk management is really important. And that you'll see some of those PPE requirements, some of those security protocols, training are all part of that management of the risk, and we've documented it all. And then the next step, obviously, is you can do the risk assessment, but you have to manage compliance with it. You have to make sure that you're actually doing the training and people are wearing the eyewear and people are putting on their coats as well. So that's a risk assessment. The other thing is a risk register. And a risk register for most projects, most programs of work, you will be required to do a risk register for those. A risk register usually has a number on the left-hand side. It might have a category, which might be concentrating on resources or stakeholders or development in this case. And this is the risk register for the Digital Now programme, which is the digital pathology learning platform that we're putting in at the college. This is an old version, so this is not the current version, but I happen to have it handy, so I used it as an example. You describe the inherent risk. So what's the baseline risk to the system? And you do a risk score based on probability and impact. So a 1 to 5. Is it got high probability of happening? And is the impact bad? That's a very high risk score. That's a 25, and you'd have to do a lot to do that. A risk register is not complete without the response action and the mitigation action on it. So you need to have that residual risk after you've implemented the measures to control the risk. So in this particular, and some you'll be able to control more than others. So if you're reliant, so on this last risk on the page, failure of a partner to deliver something is something that you can put contracts in, you can watch them like a hawk. But if when you're building a house and the builder goes bust, you can't control that. You can try and do your due diligence to make sure the builder's been working locally and is well known and you've got references. But that's something that you can mitigate against through those references, but you can't prevent it. Inability to recruit to posts, then you can advertise, you can activate, and that risk will reduce as we recruit 2 posts into that. So that's how a risk register works. When you're looking at risk, when you're looking at processes, when you're looking at job descriptions, but particularly when you're looking at risk assessments, just always think, should I be doing this in the first place? This is a kitty.com. There is no successful way to fax a cat. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jo. Another really insightful presentation about quite a challenging topic to talk about. So thank you very much for that. I was just going to start, well, we'd now open up for questions from anybody from the audience, so please type your questions in. But I was just going to ask a couple of ones, if that's all right, Jo. You know, you talked about managing risk between managing risk. Is there how to open a department, so between departments, about risks and things, and learning from each department about where things can be improved and things like that? Are we transparent, and is there some almost like we're learning from where errors have happened and mistakes have happened along those lines in risk Are we open about those things? Can we talk about those between departments and things?
Absolutely, we should do. We know that people don't talk about incidents and events, and incidents and events are reviewing those are part of making sure that they don't happen, and they feed into the learning part of any quality management system, any way that you make sure stuff doesn't happen again. We're not brilliant at sharing stuff, and we put the RC Path bulletins in to try and help share incidents and events for departments. So we have done something active about that. I would encourage everybody to be open about that. And the publication of quality reports is one way of ensuring that openness. I don't think we're terribly good at learning between events. It was very salutary when we started writing the patient safety bulletins. So I drafted out some that had happened in our organisation anonymously, obviously, and two people went through two of the honorary officers went through and said, yeah, that happened at my organisation as well. And your heart drops because it's a heads up.
And that's the thing. I think it links in with what you're going to talk about next week, I think. But being, if we're open about these things, it helps to prevent similar things happening in other places as well, doesn't it?
Certainly hope so.
I've got a few questions coming through now, Joe. So first one, as a manager, how do you try to make sure that performance/quality assessments, etc., are used to improve services rather than a stick to beat people with?
Okay, so floggings will continue until morale improves. That's the sort of baseline. Doesn't work. It doesn't work. None of us are in the job to do a bad to damage things or make performance bad or slow stuff up. As a leader and as a manager, yes, occasionally people do need to be held to account. Don't dismiss that. Somebody who absolutely has had full training, had encouragement, and then hides 3,000 clinic letters in a drawer because they can't be bothered to send them out, or because and didn't tell anyone about them, then you've got, so there is that. But actually, why did that happen? Why did they feel they were able to do that? Getting to the bottom and supporting people through to improve performance. It's got to be, it's only through working together that you can actually change some of the things from not great to good. And there's some really good examples of how to improve quality through working together. Just shouting at people and getting grumpy with people is not a great great way to manage stuff.
I suppose as well, with the future, looking ahead to the future with workforce issues on, those big worries for the future, it's going to be a really important thing to look at, I suppose. And rather than, like you say, beating people about it, look at the root cause of where these issues are and use that to try and change things. But
yeah, absolutely.
So we've got another question now from Bridget. Thank you. Should we expect to provide and see PQAD indicators, brackets ticked off or red/amber/green regularly now as a pathology component of the trust board reports?
Oh, I would absolutely hope so. Having been on a trust board, the volume of trust board papers are enormous. Mm-hmm. I would certainly expect to see a PQAD on the equivalent of quality dashboard going to a divisional meeting, and you'll hear about exception reports. Mm. So there's almost no point of the whole of the PQAD going to the trust board, but you may have a PQAD exception report where staff turnover is high, or where there's been some risk of disability or death. A RIDOR report is where somebody gets seriously injured. So if you cut yourself badly or you break a bone in a department, that's a RIDOR.
Okay.
That's an incident report affecting health. So you would expect exceptions to go to the exec team.
Okay. It always, and what you said about the trust boards and things with pathology featuring so little, it still amazes me with it being such a central part. So almost every
Yeah.
specialty within the hospital, really, it's still quite puzzling that that's the situation.
Well, you can trust. So the thing about the NHS is trust boards are open, so you can turn up and as a member of the public or as a member of staff and ask questions.
Oh wow! Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, you can do. You can do it, and people do the whole time.
Oh, okay, thank you. Another question: are we becoming compliance organisations? How do we
Yeah.
become aspiration and exceptional?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So this is always the balance between compliance and just getting on with the organisation. Compliance with all sorts of standards, UCAS in particular. It's a really expensive and time-consuming business. The counter argument to don't have any of it is that the standards are there for a reason, and you can and they're there to help us produce a better service.
Hmm.
Um, and there's some good data to show that some of the standards do actually, just putting a standard in helps raise performance. That's pretty well accepted. There is a balance. I absolutely agree about compliance. Having been on the rough end of being told to write an SOP for putting something in an envelope, I kid you not, then you do wonder whether we've got the balance right. Yeah, that was a requirement of an inspection process for a certain accreditation. So yes, it can be. You feel that that's a little pointless. And I think your compliance, again, part of the reviewing your quality management is actually what emphasis are you putting where? Are you putting it on the risky stuff, or are you putting it on writing reams of SOPs? Yes, it's useful to have an SOP so people know what they're doing. But if you're writing SOPs to put stuff in envelopes and you're not checking that all your histopathologists are misdiagnosing melanoma, then that's a I don't think you've quite got your balance right.
It made me think as well, Joe, with the standards and things, with the changing things of molecular pathology and those sort of things that are now coming on the scene, with potentially these other investigations that are really helpful but may take things a little longer, and things, and how quickly do the standards then get reviewed and changed, really, according to those new developments that are coming into the specialty.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen during COVID that regulation takes a long time to follow practice.
Mm,
So departments were testing for COVID way before they were accredited to do
yeah,
so, and it's right and proper that they did so.
yeah,
They did so under the guidance that they would normally do. They do so to recognise professional standards and with SOPs, and with safeguards and validation. But the accreditation and the regulation has taken a while to catch up.
yeah. And we've got another question now from Eric. Thank you, Eric. Is turnover of all networks reviewed centrally, and what action is taken when it is too high?
So turnover is reviewed by the staff turnover should be reviewed by the team, the clinical lead team. Comparison data, I haven't seen comparison data between networks yet, but I think it does exist. And again, that is something that I personally feel should be, the PQuad data or the performance data should be available. Some of it is usually available if you go rummaging around, but it may be just that they haven't found a place to stick it on the web yet, which is a little bit understandable at the moment. So
Thanks, Joe. Thank you. So how can or should measures like turnaround times take into account case complexity or external factors like staffing?
absolutely. So turnaround. So the standard itself should be flexed. If you'll see, most standards are not 100%; they're 90% to take some of that slippage into account, or that the odd thing that we know is going to take longer. Everybody knows that one sample out of 1,000 is going to have to be redone or whatever. So most standards are written to take that into account. I don't think you can take staff absence into account in that standard, but you can take it into account in the narrative around the performance on that.
Yeah.
So, you know, we've slipped on our, you know, we're, you know very well that certain of our disciplines in pathology are way under in terms of the number of staff we have, 25% down in some areas, and yes, staff turnover, turnaround times slip when that happens. But you shouldn't change the standard because of that. You should think about, you know, changing the staffing and what you can do to mitigate it.
I suppose it's like your audits and things you put in
Yeah,
recommendations for what you have
exactly.
from that. When you
What
find the problem, really, how can you deal
Yeah,
with it if
yeah,
that's the problem?
yeah. I mean, if you downscale a standard, you have to think really carefully about that. You know, there's been a lot of discussion in NHS England about the 4-hour waits in A&E and whether they should change that standard, and that's created a lot of worry and a lot of discussion. And that wasn't to, the stated intention was not to water down the standard, it was to more accurately reflect the need to see some patients through the system quicker than others.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Thank you, Jo. Tackling writing incident reports within a trust system can also be challenging. Any hints and tips?
Any hints and tips? So writing incident reports within the trust system, yeah, and data mixing. So it's very easy mostly it's very easy to write an incident report to say this happened. Having an initial set of timeline is very useful. Saying exactly, so when you discovered it, what action you took. So it's called a CAPA, the corrective and preventive actions. So you describe what happened, and then the full incident investigation. You know, I found, you know, so a slide was missing. I reported it to my manager. We searched the department for it. It was found on the top of the glass bin. This is a real one from us. And on discussion with the staff involved, it was mistaken for for a spare slide rather than the real slide.
Okay.
You know, no patient harm came, it was fine. So you write it in that form and then decide between you when you don't do the incident report, but when you do the incident investigation and the CAPA, what you're going to do about it then.
Okay, thanks, Jo. How do you best balance the idea of failures or issues being the fault of a poorly functioning system with KPIs that indicate lack of quality in very specific departments, teams, processes, or even individuals?
How do you just being the risk of a system? So, okay. Again, I think you've got to be. You can't necessarily be broad brush about it. It's your fault or it's the system. You have to go down into exactly what's going on. I think Abraham Lincoln said that it was Abraham Lincoln who chopped down the tree. I think it probably was. He said if he was given an hour to chop down a tree, he'd spend the first 50 minutes or whatever sharpening the axe. And so there's this whole thing about sharpening the axe, which is actually finding out what's going on, and finding out what's going on in, you know, why things are going wrong is just so much more important than just jumping in and making an assumption. And I think most of us have been guilty of making assumptions about what's happening and why and trying to sort it out.
Thanks, Jo. Thank you. We've got time for a couple more questions, if that's okay. Thank you to Betsy. What should you do when you assess a risk as high and the management above you downgrade it or try to downplay the risk without any grounds to do so because it looks bad?
Okay. So if it's truly because it looks bad, then escalate it.
Okay.
You talk. Most departments will have a quality and safety, patient quality and safety risk. You can take it up a grade. You can take it up a level. The other thing is to have a discussion with the manager who's decided to downgrade it. Have an open coaching type conversation. What was your thinking behind that? Are you worried about your own post? Are you worried about you looking bad? And we're actually on the same side. We're both on the side of patients for this.
Yeah.
So I think trying to rebase it into actually we're on the same side, rather than getting into a combative sort of, oh no, I disagree with you on thing. It's finding out where they're going with it, why they're doing it. You may be making the assumption it looks bad, but they, it may be that they are in turn are not supported by their manager, or they're being bullied or whatever, in which case a different approach is needed.
Okay, thanks, Jo.
So try and get to the bottom of it again a bit more.
As NHSI pathology advisor, would you change any of their metrics on the dashboard?
I would change any of the metrics on the dashboard. I think you're going to always need some local metrics. So I think you're always going to have metrics which, are aspirational ones for your, for your department. I think there are some, particularly at the moment, where, it's really hard to meet them. And there's some that you may not meet without IT investment, or without air tubes, or without investment in staff. So particular ones that I would think of. Can't think of any offhand. Probably if you've got one in mind, if whoever's suggested it has got one in mind, I'm happy to check that one again.
Thanks, Jo. And just to finish, about the things you've talked about tonight, I know trainees are very involved in audits quite a lot within departments and quality improvements like that. Are there opportunities to get involved in some of these things like risk management and all the risk registers and things? Are there opportunities for trainees to get involved in that?
Absolutely. So QI, speak to your service manager. Ask to see the risk register, not in a threatening way. Can I see the risk register? Yes, I want to inspect your risk register. But just ask them how they do it. Have you got COVID? Have you got COVID on the risk register? What do you do? Ask them how they deal with it. And it's really interesting to see how they view it as well.
I was really, the reason I ask is I did a lot of that when I was at the Nightingale, risk registers and SOPs with the team, and things sort of thrown in very quickly, and learned on. I had some very experienced colleagues that helped me with that, but it was a lot of learning points came from it, and it was interesting to see how things like that work. So,
it is. I mean, it's a pretty important part of any role. So any business will have a risk register. Any board will be looking at risk registers, and making sure our job is to make sure that stuff gets fed up into that appropriately. And you do learn a lot from just reviewing it and just having another think and going, actually, is that our major risk? Well, actually, no, the major risk is actually, in retrospect, it's an epidemic. Not having any start, and it changes so much in context. So at the moment, a major risk is actually we all get pinged on test and trace and have to self-isolate for 14 weeks, and the service falls over. So how can we mitigate that? We'll mitigate that by not going out partying, not going out mingling too closely with other people, by wearing PPE as we're supposed to, and precautions at work. So
That's lovely, Joe. I think we'll call it a night there. Thank you very
But,
much for another excellent presentation and for answering
well,
those questions. Thank you to all our delegates for coming, and thank you very much for asking so many questions. I'm sorry we didn't get through all of them tonight. We'll do our best to try and get some answers to those ones that have also been asked as well. Thank you very much again to Joe and also the RC Path team for all their efforts in helping to put this seminar together. And I look forward to hopefully welcome you next Wednesday evening, where Joe will be talking about dealing with mistakes and complaints. So I wish you all a happy week ahead and hope to see you next week. Thank you very much.
Matt, thank you so much.